Okay.
I'll let you start, Dad. You can do a quick intro.
So thank you everyone for joining us today for the export grant webinar. Today we have Stuart Smith, who's a grant specialist from Vebiz. He's our guest speaker. Stuart Smith specializes in providing consulting services for businesses, commercializing and government grants, including the R&D and tax incentive, EMDG, which is the Export Market Development Grant, and other government programs. He's got over 30 years of experience in management and operations, and he assisted many companies in various industries. He's also helping us as Musiad with our application for the EMDG. So thank you very much for joining us today, Stuart.
Thank you, Dad. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to go through, we cover a number of different grants, Robert and myself. We've been in business for about 20 odd years doing this with different grants, particularly the research and development, the export market development grant. And we've known each other, we get on pretty well because we've known each other since we were 12. So it's been any questions you can ask me, he can probably answer before I've thought of the answer. The agenda for today is to really just talk about the Export Market Development Grant. Quick reason for that is applications will open and close pretty short afterwards. So there's a small window of that. We can, in Q&A, we can discuss other grants if people have particular interests that they want to know about. So I'll explain what it is, what your eligibility is, what the rules are that govern the Export Market Development Grant, and what the timelines are that we will need to work with. And plenty of time for questions. And if you have any questions, please feel free to stick your hand up, contact Mipdad and interrupt at any time. That's fine. So what is the EMDG? The EMDG it's a federal program. So it's run by the federal government. It's been around since 1974, and it's designed to help exporters. It provides up to 50% of a reimbursement for your marketing costs for overseas. So if you go and do something to enhance your opportunity for selling your products, your goods, your services overseas, the government's stepping up with a 50% benefit of those costs. Under the way that the program works, you need to make a grant application prior to the financial year in which you're going to spend the money. So what we're talking about at the moment is for the next financial year, which is 23-24. And we're going to say how much we're going to spend, and the government will come back and tell us how much they're going to give us. But in theory, it's up to 50% of what your marketing expenses are going to be overseas. The funds are not paid up front. The funds are paid as a reimbursement. So it won't be until July 24 that the funds are paid. You need to spend the money and then you get it back. And there's a report that you need to put in to say what you did, and they need to check that they're giving you money for what you said you did. Those are assessed and or they can be reviewed. So the assessment is they have a look over them and say, yep, that's fine. They pass the money back. A review is where they might come back and ask more questions, and that's just a random selection of people. And they'll want more detail about who you might have met with, where you traveled, what you talked about, and that sort of thing. Like any government program, there are lots of rules about how this program works, and we'll explore some of those today. There's the type of expenditure that you're allowed. What are marketing expenses? And we'll cover what are marketing expenses. Rules about where you can market, when you can market, how you're allowed to market, and why this program is there. So what we'll look at to start with is your eligibility. So anyone that feels that they're not eligible and never will be, they can probably go and have a nice glass of cold water on a hot day like today. But the program, the program has these are how you open the doorway to get into it. First thing is you need to have an ABN. That doesn't preclude not-for-profits. It doesn't preclude sole traders. It's as long as you're in business. So trusts, companies, public companies, partnerships, sole traders are all eligible to be are all an eligible applicant. You need to be an Australian person, meaning your place of residence your corporation or your own place of residence is Australia. You're an Australian registered business. Now, overseas companies can have a branch office out here, but as long as that branch office is doing the export grant in its own right for what they're exporting back overseas, they're allowed to. But obviously, the whole purpose of this is the Australian government's giving money to Australian companies to benefit Australia. So if you keep that at the back of your mind all the time, you'll understand where these rules are coming from. The grant can be applied for up to 8 times. So anyone that's had less than 8 grants since 1990, or less than 770,000 in total grants in those 8 years of grants, are eligible for the grant. Under 20 million of turnover. So companies with a turnover over 20 million are not eligible. That means the actual ABN entity. So a company may think of itself as one company, but it may actually have a number of subsidiaries or companies that it owns majority interest in that all have separate ABNs. If those ABNs of that company are under 20 million, then they're eligible to apply. It does not amalgamate it does not accumulate all the turnover of all the different businesses. That happens in other grants, such as the research and development. In this, it's actually the turnover of the individual ABN that is important. You'll need a MyGov ID. Most people with an ABN nowadays know that they have to have a MyGov ID to interact with government at a business level. This is not the MyGov that you use for your Medicare or your own personal tax. They are 2 different things. And if you're not certain, please contact us later or go and just Google MyGov ID and understand what you have to do. I would also throw in at this point that anyone that is a company director, they also need to make sure that they have done their director's ID with ASIC, because that's coming to a close, and the letters seem to be becoming more urgent that if you don't get it done, then you're going to be in breach of whatever they're going to do if you're in breach of not having your director's ID done. The applicant has to be ready to export. In other words, you need to understand what's necessary for you to export. You've either done an export training course, you've spoken to a consultant that has helped you get ready for export. It's not a hard hurdle to overcome. And while you can apply now, you can be ready for export. If you've done nothing about export at all, you could still be ready by the time that we come to July 1 anyway. And you need to comply with ATO and other government requirements. So, for instance, you need not to have breached the equal rights legislation. You need to make sure that you haven't breached the modern slavery legislation. You need to make sure that the ATO is not chasing you for back taxes, things like that. So some fairly reasonable expectations that the companies that the government's going to give their money to are actually following Australian laws. When you're going to export, you're going to export what we call products. And a product is a goods, something you make, something physical. You're making clothing, you're making jet engines, you're making dog collars, it doesn't matter, you're making something. Your services, so you could be offering a service overseas of different types. It could be a physiotherapy service, it could be a service of architecture, a service as it would be defined in Australia. You can be looking to license your intellectual property overseas. So you have patents that you want to license or a trademark. Alex Perry licenses his name overseas. So they put on sunglasses, they put on all sorts of things. That's his trademark and that's intellectual property. He never produces a set of sunglasses or even probably frocks these days, but they all have his name on them. Tourism, anyone that's trying to bring tourists into Australia, not anyone, sorry, but there are a group within the tourism industry that are eligible for trying to attract tourists to Australia. People that run events in Australia. So, for instance, if Mick was an events organizer and he always ran Australia always had a Musead Chamber of Commerce grand conference here. And so therefore he was the event organizer. He would be able to claim that because he's trying to get other people coming to this event from overseas. Software is now not just considered another service or a goods or an IP. It has its own class, but effectively it's the same thing. If you've got software, then if you're making software, then you can export you can be it's an eligible product for export. And know-how, which is along the same lines of intellectual property. But if, for instance, you were McDonald's and you've got this great big manual of how you should cook burgers and you want to go and start a burger chain overseas, Guzman, and they're a little bit over 20 million now, the Guzman and I can't think of how but the new Mexican takeaway group, they want to start that in, they want to go to other countries and market their product. They're marketing their brand, but they're also marketing their know-how, their manual of how you do things. And that's somewhat different to the brand. You're actually marketing what you know rather than what you actually own, which is intellectual property. So goods, if you're marketing goods overseas, they need to be made in Australia, which means it can be wool off the sheep's back, it can be tomatoes that you've grown, it can be dog collars that you've turned out in your factory at Padstow. It can be made in Australia. Alternatively, you can have goods that are made overseas. So a lot of our fashion designers are having stuff made in India, they're having stuff made in China and overseas. For instance, you could have products made in Turkey. The main thing is if they are designed in Australia, the design, this is all about value add to Australia and the value of the intellectual property that you put into those. So if you are making, let's say, clothing, and instead of picking on China all the time, we'll pick on Turkey, and you're designing this, but you're having it made in Turkey, and then it's being exported around the world, as long as there is a reasonable amount of work being done in Australia, so the design, the creativity is here. You may use a pattern maker here. You've got other assets out here that you need to run your business and run your export. And as long as then there is a reasonable markup between the cost of producing those goods in Turkey and the actual price you end up selling them for. So what they don't want you doing is saying, oh, I've designed a new set of thongs and flip-flops, and I'm having them made in Bangladesh and they cost me $1 to make, but I know I'm going to sell 1 million of them, so I only charge 10 cents extra. That's not going to be seen as value adding to Australia, even though you might have designed them. There is no premium for them being made for being Australian design. Even though you design them, there's no premium there coming back to Australia. Services, similar, they have a value add proposition, which means that it is more and more difficult for a company to offer services and then provide those services in the country they're offering them, which is a little unfair. So for instance, if you want a large architectural job overseas, you still need to do a lot of the design work, etc., back here and employ Australians in that. You can't say, good, I've won this design competition. I'm going to build an office tower in Singapore. Right, I'm going to set my office up over there. I'm going to hire lots of Singaporeans to do the draft work. You're not really using Australian services or Australian other value add out here. And that is a problem with services that we need to look at. And we'll come to it later, but that's again where Vebiz can help you navigate how you get around some of these questions that Austrade will put in. IP, so you've got trademarks or you've got patents that you've done it as long as you've developed them in Australia. So if you're a biotech company and you've come up with a brand new medical solution, as long as your research and development was done here. It's no good being an Australian company that actually did all your research work in America and then say, oh, I'm just going to sell it from Australia to get the marketing grant. The research work has to be predominantly done as it would be under a research and development tax incentive grant that you'll get in Australia. Software, you've just got to prove that that there is copyright in the software and that you own the copyright. Oh. And the development was essentially done in Australia. It doesn't prevent you using software development overseas, but what it means is you can't suddenly say, oh, I want an app to write an EMDG application for me. I'll just send that quick specification off to India and get them to write it and send it back to me. You have to be involved in the development, the algorithms that are going to be used, and all the rest of it. There are some exclusions about what an eligible product is. Services, for instance, you can't be a migration agent service. You can be a migration agent and still get it for doing things that aren't migration agent for bringing people into the country, bringing people in. You can't have illegal products. You can't sell illegal products. You can't include products that have got no hope of being sold in the country that you say you're going to market them to. So without stereotyping, but it's an example I always use, if you're a wine salesman and a Jim Beam salesman or an Australian brandy salesman, you might find it difficult to get an export marketing grant for selling your product into Pakistan or a similar country that is a very dry country, because really there's not a big opportunity there for big sales of your particular product. So there are some exclusions. The exclusions are really for people that probably aren't going to be interested in the export grant anyway. So anyone that's listening, they're going to find themselves more than likely eligible because of the products they sell or their own application. The other exclusions are, it doesn't include marketing to New Zealand, to Russia, Belarus, or North Korea. And from time to time, this list changes. New Zealand is always on it. It's all those terrorist countries you can see there, but New Zealand has got such a close financial relationship with us. And until we win the Bledisloe Cup, they probably will keep excluding them, I think. But this will change from time to time. Iran was on that for some period of time. Then the sanctions finish. So countries that come under sanctioning will find themselves ineligible. It is only for marketing costs. So the EMDG doesn't cover legal costs, logistics costs, any supply side costs. So you can't go for a trip and say, look, the cost of me making this product and going over and finding the right materials in Italy because I want some really fine glassware I need. None of that's included. And even training. So you've just developed this great pump, you've sent it out to all your clients and they want you to come and explain how it works. The cost of that training would not be eligible, for instance. The product must exist. So you can't go overseas and sell an idea or even a prototype. When you go overseas to sell something, it has to be something that if the first person you ask says, oh, can I buy that? You say, yes, here it is. And you know the price of it and you know how you're going to get it there. So the product or the service is available for sale when you start marketing the product. It is only for invoice cost. So eligible costs doesn't include your salary, except in a particular instance. So there are always exclusions, but it doesn't include this. You might have an export marketing manager, but you can't claim his salary, even if all he does is arrange for sales overseas. But he sits in an office in Sydney and he arranges for sales overseas. He's a salaried person. It doesn't include them. So it's only for costs that you get an invoice for, and therefore you can demonstrate that it's that there's a relationship, a third-party relationship, an arm's length relationship. It doesn't include performance costs. So, for instance, your agent, you may have an agent overseas that's selling on commission. Your agent's, the amount you pay your agent based on commission is not eligible because it's a performance cost. The exclusion for that, again, is that when you use Google AdWords, you only pay when someone clicks through. That is okay. That's fine. Using Google AdWords, and you get charged, that's fine, because it's not, you're not actually being paid for the sale. It's still only based around the cost of the marketing is the reason. But that's a performance cost I would consider. So performance cost and invoice costs are the two things you need to keep an eye on. Oh, and all the costs need to be acquitted in the financial year. So you can't have a consultant that you're going to use and have them on accrual basis and pay them in the following year. You've got to, it has to be shown that whatever claim you're making on cost, we're actually satisfied in that financial year. Now, again, there are some exclusions. For instance, and normally it means that the work was done in that financial year and you paid for it in that financial year. But if you find that you're going overseas in July, but there's some really good deals on the plane trip in June, and you buy the airfare in June, you can still claim it when you claim in July, when you fly in July. So it'll go into that final in that year. At other times, people will pay for it in June because they get it in an airfare's case, you've got to pay for it straight away. In that case, you're taking the trip in July, so it will be counted, even though you paid for it in June. In other instances, you may get the service performed in June, but you don't actually pay for it till July. So both of those, when you're on the borderline between June, July, or May through to maybe August, when they're in that border area, then you can be a little bit out of your financial year. But otherwise, all your costs need to be acquitted on a cash basis.
So, Stuart, can I ask just a couple of things? One of them is a question and the other one is a clarification, just so that because we are on this slide. So if someone pays for their traveling in
Yeah.
June or May, but they travel in July in the financial year where they are eligible for the grant, in this case, that payment that they paid in June or May, does it qualify or not?
It does. It
It
does.
does.
And for instance, things like a trade fair,
Yeah.
you need to book 12 months out or you don't get the booze.
Yes, correct.
But you would pay for that this year and you're not going to get any EMDG this year because you haven't made an application. So that would be eligible because you're actually, their term acquitted refers to both the action of the service being provided or the goods being provided to you, whether it be the trade show or whatever it might be, and of it being paid. So in that particular instance, yes, you would pay for it now. You might pay for it now, which is 3 or 4 months before the end of the year. And you may not even use it until next March because you've got to actually give 12 months notice to actually get a booth. That would still be accepted in the year of next year because it happened before you would have paid for it and used it before July. Okay.
Perfect, thank you. And I have another thing here on this slide, just to clarify my understanding. So here it says no training, but I think training for marketing purposes does qualify. Just to clarify this to the audience, correct? If the training was for marketing purposes.
Okay, so very good point. Training for a representative body, which is what Muziad is an eligible expense. That's training in export services. So you talking to Hassan coming and talking to me and saying, look, when you go to Turkey, you've got to make sure you do this and this, and you've got to follow this rules. That's training me about export. That's all right for Muziad. Where I'm talking about is you can't sell a product overseas or your software and then say, oh, I'm flying over to tell them how to use my product. Okay, that even though that's not because you've already made the sale. If you're training people on how
what
to use,
if it's pre-sales, like
in that case you're not training.
it's not really training, you are actually doing pre-sales. Yeah,
that's demonstrating.
That's right.
That's
Yeah, demonstration. Yes,
they haven't made the sale. So the other subtle thing about that is, one customer may have bought it, and you're going over to demonstrate to them, but only one of their divisions has bought it. So you might be demonstrating it to their other divisions. It comes down, look, at the end of the day, you can bend the words, and say, oh, I was just demonstrating, not training. But what they're after is when the sale's made, the marketing has finished. And until the next time you're doing something, it's to a new opportunity for a new sale, then, as I said, at the point in time that the sale's made, and in fact, some particular things Austrade will actually draw a definitive line. So it's like when you're talking to the customer in the shop, you walk out from behind your counter and you say, what would you like to buy? And you have a yak to them. And if you charge for all that, that's fine. When they come up and you click the cash register, whatever you tell them after that is no longer marketing, unless it's going to be for a new product. So it's a very clear line between the sale and what happens post-sale to what happens pre-sale. And so marketing costs are any of those things that happen pre-sale. Okay.
Thank you. Very clear. Thank you, Stuart.
And the other thing I've left off there is it can't involve any finance. So whether you're looking for loans or you're looking for capital investment, capital is a word that Austrade suddenly decide they've got to look at every word you mentioned the word capital or finance or loan, and suddenly Austrade looked at everything you do and think that all you've done is go overseas to find investors. Austrade are very triggered by certain words, and one of them is capital and investment. So the other part of that down the bottom is related party costs. So all of these costs that we're going to look at are eligible, except if they're provided by a related party. So you've got a business of finding people for interns, but the PR company that you use, the marketing company you use to go and market for you, happens to be your wife's company. That would not be eligible. If there's a relationship at a close relationship, so father, brother, wife, something like that, then that's too close for all of these costs to be eligible. Okay. The acceptance is if you've got a marketing representative overseas, and I'll cover that later. It could be that the relationship is that you're a major shareholder in another company or a director of two companies. So it makes sense to have a marketing company and a manufacturing company, but you run your own marketing. If you do that, you can't claim the marketing cost because you're a director of both companies. So there's a relationship between those. So related party costs are not included in this. Now, that affects some people, but if you're using digital marketing, using Google, Facebook, WhatsApp, all of those tools, doesn't matter if you're a shareholder. You might be a shareholder in Microsoft or Facebook. It's not that they're talking about. They're talking about this. Are you related in terms of one having some control over the other person? So they're the things that'll make you eligible. So if you've thought about what your business is and you think, oh, hang on, I do that or I don't do that, then have a talk to us and we'll also explain the shades of grey that might come with that eligibility. Some of them are very straightforward. For instance, you might say, well, I'm marketing to New Zealand. You say, well, you can't do it. But on the other hand, if you're going to New Zealand because there's a conference on internship, Dad, and there's going to be a whole lot of other people from around the world going to New Zealand, then that still would be acceptable. Because again, you're marketing to people other than New Zealanders. So all of these will have a shade of grey or a further qualification that you might want to understand. So don't sort of immediately, if you're doing 20 million of turnover, you probably don't need to come and talk to us at the moment anyway. But having said that, again, go back to the actual rules and have a talk to us anyway. So how does this work? How do Austrade work? What they've done is they've divided exporters into 3 groups of exporters. Tier 1 are people that are new to export. Tier 2 are people that are already exporting and they just want to do the same thing with they spend a little bit more money in the markets they're in. And tier 3 are those that are making a strategic shift, which we'll come to. Now, why does this matter? Because each of those tiers has an upper maximum of the amount of money that Austrade is going to make available to you as part of the grant. Unfortunately, this is the bad news part of it because these numbers keep getting less because the government is not putting any more money into this than what they put into it in the year 2000. In fact, more money was put into this on an annual basis in the year 2000 than is currently put into it at the moment. So they currently put $137 million a year into this grant. It used to be $200 million. So it's getting spread thinner and thinner, and obviously costs are going up. So, the number of exporters in Australia is going up from the year 2000. What it cost them is going up. So each person is getting less and less. And all I can say is write to your local politician and complain. So if you're a tier 1, in other words, you haven't exported before, but you're going to start, then the maximum grant you can get will be $10,000. Now, remembering that your grant is 50% of your marketing costs up to whatever this maximum is. So if you're a new exporter and you spend $8,000 on marketing because you take a trip overseas and you stay in a couple of hotels, then you'll get $4,000 as your reimbursement. If you spend $20,000, you'll get $10,000 as your reimbursement. And if you spend $120,000, you'll still only get $10,000 as your reimbursement. So that number is the upper amount that you'll get back, but you'll get 50% back of whatever it is up to the maximum amount. So what you need to show there is that you're ready for export, that yes, you've got a product for sale, you understand what you need to do to export, that there are things called duty, there are things called transfer pricing. You've somehow got to ship your product over there. You've got to be able to show that you understand those aspects of being an exporter. Expanding your promotional activities means that you're already exporting, you're doing something over there, you're using digital, using Facebook, you're going to trade shows. You're really quite happy in the market you're in. You're selling into the US. You don't need to go anywhere else around the world. You just need to keep that up. So you need to demonstrate. So you just keep increasing your expenditure in the same market. first timers into the grant, which most people here are, I'm expecting, you need to demonstrate that you've got an export prior to being allowed into tier 2, which means showing an invoice from last year at some stage. So as long as you've got one invoice, I had one client that was was writing an app, and they'd managed to get a person subscribed, and that person had paid a $5 subscription, and they'd invoiced them for it, of course, and that was sufficient to show that they had exported, and that moved them from the tier 1 category into the tier 2 category. And in fact, I think we moved them into the tier 3 because they'd been marketing to the US, and they said, we actually want to market in the UK. So they actually, because they had that demonstrable export invoice, it doesn't matter, actually doesn't, they do like to see it's been paid, but it may be an invoice that they're awaiting payment because you're still awaiting payment on. But as long as you've got that invoice, that's the starting point for doing this. And that means that you need an invoice. It's unfortunate the invoice is needed before, as part of the application, which means it's going to be needed before the 15th of April, not before the 30th, not before the 1st of July. Although, again, see us and we'll see if we can get around that limitation. Maximum grant in tier 3 is 25,000, which means you can spend up to 50,000 to get your full 50% back. The strategic shift means that you're going to sell a new product or go to a new country in your marketing effort. So you're previously selling gumboots, and now you're going to go off and sell. They probably wouldn't like the idea that you might sell other boots, or they might not even like the idea you're going to sell umbrellas, but you're going to go and sell doormats or something else. So it's a product that is away from the industry and the product you're currently selling. And it's got to be, there's no definition of how far away, it just has to be some sort of separation. Or you're selling it into a different product. So you've been marketing into the US and you think, no, I need to go and market to South America now. So those form a strategic shift. And if we can find the strategic shift, it gives you potentially a much greater value out of the grant. As I said, this is round 3 of these grants. In round 1, the amounts that they offered were 15,000, 24,000, and 36,000. In round 2 of the grants, they offered 10,000, 18,000, and 28,000. Our expectation is that they will offer less again this year. And that's why I've picked these numbers. I don't know those numbers for certain, but the trend is that they will be somewhat a little bit less than what round 3 was, unfortunately. So they're the tiers. What are your export marketing expenses? We'll quickly run over this and then we'll go into a bit more detail. Overseas representatives, a consultant, free samples, intellectual property, marketing visits overseas, training activities only for representative bodies like Muziad. If any of you belong to another organisation that represents lots of members and it's not for profit, in other words, there's no profit for that organisation, and they have lots of members, then they could also, we need to talk to them separately in the same way that Muziad falls into this group here. Promotions and advertising, this is all the general, the digital, the radio, the TV. Overseas buyers program, we'll come to, and marketing visits overseas in Australia. I've got that one twice. One of these should have been within it. So one is in Australia and one is out of Australia. So representative in a foreign country. You have a contract with someone in a foreign, whether it be a person or a business, representing you in a foreign country. They can do research or promotional activities, so they might be researching the market for you. They need to be on a contract of 6 months or more, and they need to be paid a retainer and expenses. In other words, it's got to be an at-risk money. They're not an agent. There's someone that you are paying regularly that may not find any work for you. They may not find a customer. That's your risk, and that's what you need to have. And you'll have a contract in place, and we'll help you with the contract. Now, this person can be a member of the family. It can be an employee of the company, and that employee can be sent overseas to act as the representative and be living in country for 6 months. This is the other thing. This representative, they represent you in country. They live in the country that you're looking at. So if you're going to pick one of our people there, if you're going to go and market in the Emirates, then that person would be living in the Emirates for that 6 months of time. In other words, they can't commute backwards and forwards to Australia. They actually will be living there. The benefit for an employee is that they actually retain their employment status as an Australian. So their superannuation, their long service leave, any bonuses, they don't have to stop being an employee of yours to qualify for this. Marketing consultants are either project or ongoing engagement, but they're not equivalent to an employee. So the old thing is personal services. If you've got a consultant that is just working for you, it is much more difficult to prove that they're a consultant that's not an employee than if they do work for you and they do work for other people. Now, some people only want part-time work. Austrade is allowed, has the discretion to say, no, we think they look like an employee, they talk like an employee, we're going to call them an employee, and therefore what you're paying them is not. So have a talk to us about that if you've got consultants that are doing ongoing work for you. Projects are okay. You employ a consultant to do an export plan, you employ them to research demographics in Upper Uzbekistan for you because you don't know anything about it. Those are fine. They're on a contract basis. They can do research or promotional work. They may go overseas selling for you. They may just do the marketing research. They may develop a branding program for you, or things like that. Marketing visits in foreign countries, you're allowed up to 21 days out of Australia per trip. So if you're going to be more than 21 days and you come back to Australia and then go out again, the 21 days starts again. So you can get 42 days. Why is that important? Because what's covered under this is your airfares overseas, plus you get a daily allowance of $350 for each day you're out of Australia. So that daily allowance is intended to cover things like your accommodation, your transport overseas, whether it be the tube or the taxi or your Uber or hire car or whatever you use, and it covers your food and incidental costs. So they don't go into all the detail there. They can, but they don't go into all the detail there, and they look at your airfares. And those airfares can be your business class airfares or 65% of a first class fare. And that is for each person that travels. So if you're taking a delegation overseas or from your company, if you've got a company and you're taking 3 or 4 people on your business trip overseas, then they each get the daily allowance, even if you're all staying in the same room at the hotel. Your airfares, whatever the airfares are, the boss might go business and everyone else goes economy. It's whatever the airfares are actually invoiced and paid for. Again, there are some rules on who can go. A family member can travel as long as they are a full-time employee or a full-time director. But other than that, you can't claim, even if they're very important to you, even if they're an advisor, they might be a legal person, so they're coming, or they have particular skills in what you're selling. If they're not a full-time employee or full-time director, you won't be able to claim them on that marketing trip. Visitors to Australia, expenses of marketing to foreign buyers in Australia. So if you go to Fashion Week that happens to be in Melbourne, and there's a whole lot of fashion companies and magazines out here, then it will help cover that going down to Melbourne, your airfares and the cost of being down there. Again, it's limited to 21 days a trip. So if you do a trip around Australia and you're going from Sydney to Melbourne to Brisbane to Western Australia because you're following a trade conference around, it would be limited to 21 days. You can cover, I've included these in 2 separate categories, but I'll put them together. You can cover the cost of a foreign buyer visiting Australia. So you might have someone from government, particularly overseas, that doesn't have a budget to come out to here. And you say, look, I'll pay for your airfare, I'll put you up in the hotel. You can always pick a very nice hotel in a very nice place. You know, Port Douglas would be a nice place to conduct your business with them. But you can pay for all of those, and that is eligible expenditure because, again, you're talking to a foreign buyer. So again, in that case, for the foreign buyer, you can claim their international and Australian airfares and all of their costs for what it's costing you to put them up. So if you go to dinner with them, if you have a meal with them, then you can claim the cost of their meal, but you can't claim the cost of your meal, for instance. So trade shows and showrooms, they call this terrible name for it, soliciting for business in a foreign country. Basically going out and trying to sell your product overseas. And normally that refers to showrooms and trade shows. Showrooms, again, certain organisations will set up business where you can have lots of businesses will put their product in there, and there's someone there that's representing all these different things. They're not your representative; they're just there showing off your product. The fashion industry uses this extensively around the world, in that a company in the US, in Los Angeles, will represent hundreds of different labels. So the stylist will go to their warehouse and they'll say, who do you want to see? Oh, we want to see this designer or that designer. They'll take them to a rack of clothing in the warehouse where it's all nicely displayed. It's just a private showroom, and they're paying for you're paying for the fact that your sample, your products are being stored in that showroom. But it doesn't have to be in fashion, it can be anything. Or you can go to a trade show. So you go to Las Vegas because that's where the big tech trade show is, or there's a trade show somewhere else. For instance, people that went to the Muziad trade show in Turkey last year, those individuals would be able to claim their costs of going over to that trade show. Okay. Muziad in this particular instance took the booth. But if you wanted to take a booth yourself at a trade show, then the cost of that booth, the cost of anyone you needed to man it, to stock it and all that, that's all an eligible expenditure for you. The more common one is the next one is promotional literature and advertising, and that's all your digital, radio, television, magazine, print. If you do sponsorship, you may sponsor the F1 in Bahrain. I don't think 25,000 is going to go very far in terms of what you get back, but you may be a sponsor for an event overseas or an event in Australia that has a high foreign viewership. So we did a thing for a swimwear company, and they did they were sponsoring the Coolangatta Gold, the big race up in Coolangatta. And they said, well, why are you claiming for that? That's Australians and it's on the Australian beach. I said, yes, but Fox or Sky Sports Fox broadcast this to Japan, the US, and all of Europe. And yes, there's 200,000 people look at it in Australia, but there's 25 million people look at it from around the rest of the world. And we can show you the figures of what watched that show. So we were able to claim the cost of what their sponsorship was for that Australian thing, because they were being seen around the world. Or you can sponsor something overseas. Now, anything in this area will be a portion between the number of overseas eyeballs that can see it and the number of Australian that can see it, Australia, New Zealand. So if you've got a website, then your website will give you analytics about where the people that go to your website are coming from. You just run, say, Google Analytics, and that's a straight percentage. So Australia has 23%, New Zealand has 1%, so that's 24% of viewership, which means that you can then claim 76% of your costs for that particular marketing thing that you're doing there. If, for instance, you do a Google AdWords or a Facebook marketing in the US and you say, no, it's got to be bounded by only people that live in the New York area, then that will be 100%, because the only people who can look at that are overseas people. Okay, in Australia, you can't look at it. So each one of those promotion things we need to look at. Normally, we try and come up with just a general number that you can use. And one I left off there, which is the more frequent now, is influencers. So if you're going to use an influencer, the cost of that influencer, for instance, is eligible. In these costs, it's from your production costs. So I go back to the fashion industry, which we've done quite a bit of work with. They will hire models. They will hire a nice venue. They want to do it on the top of the Harbour Bridge, and so they have to rent that. They have hairdressers. They have graphic artists. And they have people that do the web design, transfer it to the web, and do their. All of those costs are included, not just the cost of what your website hosting would be, for instance. It's all the production costs of your marketing strategy are going to be included in these. So your PR agent, for instance, you've got a PR agent in Australia, they do Australian stuff. See if they're doing overseas stuff, get them to invoice you separately so we can easily identify what were overseas costs and what were Australian costs. Intellectual property rights, you can claim the cost of your trademarks overseas, obtaining or extending them, or your patents or your plant breeders' rights, or your I can't think of the name, it's circuit board design have rights that you can claim internationally. Any of those where you're claiming the cost of that IP protection, your lawyer's costs, your attorney's costs, the government fees are included as eligible expenditure. Samples Samples are something you sell, but you give away. So it's got to be on a price list. An example is a wine company made some beautiful, go back one. Wine company sold beautiful bottles of wine. They thought, we're going to go and give a lot of this away overseas, and everyone will taste it and they'll think it's fantastic and they'll buy our product. But they thought, we don't have to give away 750 mils in a wine bottle. What we'll do is we'll make up a whole lot of 375 ml bottles and they can have the small half size. So when they did that, that was fine. They got it all. They made lots of sales. It was terrific. When Austrade came and said, so this is what your sample was. Yes, we gave away 100 bottles. And the person said, well, how much do you sell it for? And the guy said, oh, we don't sell it. We just made it so we could give it away. That claim was not allowed because it wasn't a product that they sold. It was a product that they had created just for that. Because they hadn't paid someone for it, because there was no contract cost, no invoice, they couldn't even claim that it was a cost to them because it was done internally. So in a sample, it's your cost price, not your sale price. And then you can include your freight and insurance. So the fashion industry gifts a lot. They'll have samples. You can use your samples that you're giving away, but not your prototypes. As I said, the fashion industry gifts a lot. They throw stuff at Meghan Markle or whoever it might be, and they need to make sure that they get some receipt that it was actually. If you're gifting anonymously, you need to know that it was received. If you're gifting and you know the person, you're dressing a person overseas, then normally you'll have something back from them on your messaging or something saying, thanks, got the goods. But when people do it anonymously, hoping that the stylist will grab it, put them on it, they often don't get any replies because they're getting hundreds of these things thrown at them every day. The last one is a representative body. They have an extra claim that they can do training for export. Okay, and that, again, we work closely with Muziad to make sure that they are able to claim as much as they can for your organisation, not for the individuals of Muziad, but it goes back into the coffers of the Muziad rather than the individuals. I'll take a quick break. Does anybody have any questions there? Have I exhausted everybody?
All good on my end. No questions at the moment.
Happy to go on then. To keep moving through it. So
I have one quick question.
Yep.
Which is about tax. So these expenses that are marketing expenses that are specifically for the EMDG, do they go in a separate bucket they are not part of the P&L? Because, for example, for the research and development grant, my understanding is that whatever you spend on research that you will allocate to the grant, it doesn't go to your normal P&L. So it goes in a separate bucket so that you'll be able to become eligible for the grant. So is this the same scenario with the EMDG or is it different?
Well, firstly, I think I need to correct a little bit about what you said, the R&D.
Yeah.
Your P&L is your P&L. So it goes into your expenses. So when you put your expenses into your Xero, they will go into Xero. Now, yes, they are treated differently so that they can be identified as R&D, and it does affect your income tax return will look different to a person that's not claiming research and development, because that's a tax. That's a tax incentive. This is an actual refund directly back from the government. So this doesn't go through the tax system. But your question is very timely. What you can claim in your expenses does exclude GST. So if you go and pay and other government charges. So if you go and pay for your PR consultant to do some work, they will say, yep, here's our $1,000 bill. Oh, and there's $100 GST on it. Okay. So when you put the
GST doesn't count towards the grant.
No, that's right. So when you go to say, how much did you spend? It's just the $1,000. It's a good point. I haven't put it in here, I must admit. So yeah, you would just claim the $100, the $1,000, not the $100 of GST. If you've paid somebody that is not registered for GST, then obviously you can claim the whole lot. Okay, because you don't have to do the calculation. You don't have, but when you do pay overseas taxes, they are eligible. So you go and you buy a trade show in the UK,
Yeah.
you'll buy your trade show, then you'll have your value added tax, their equivalent of GST.
Yeah.
That you can claim. So it's
Because
only
it's a separate system. It's not
it's
not
cost.
related.
That's right. So it's only Australian taxes that you can't claim.
Because it's a full expense for me, because the VAT does not correlate, does not relate to our GST.
Exactly. Now, where if I want to get really, really technical with that,
Yeah, yeah.
when you've gone to the US, when you've gone to the UK, you've accumulated all these VAT taxes, but you've done it as a visitor. And Australia, people coming to Australia can do this with GST, by the way, anyway. And you've accumulated all these VAT costs. You can then apply to and you've paid them all, and you've got all your receipts, etc. You can apply to the UK government for a refund of your VAT, of your value-added taxes.
Yeah.
If you do that, then you can't claim them in your EMDG, because then you'd be double dipping. So
Makes sense. Yeah.
It's just my design of the way I like to talk about the product, that I don't want to leave someone going off and doing something when, gee, Stuart, if you'd told us that, we wouldn't have made that mistake. So I always go probably to more detail than what people need, but it's so that you don't go off with a lack of information, because it may be that you'll make a big business decision, not come back and talk to us, make a business decision that I haven't actually given you all the information to assess. Short answer is no. You just put this into your ordinary P&L. And what I would suggest is that if you're using Xero, create a filter in your Xero, call it EMDG, and every time you have a EMDG invoice coming in, just tag it with EMDG, so that at the end of the year, when you want to find all those EMDG invoices, make it easy to work out how much you've done, you just say, yep, find all the invoices that I've tagged as EMDG. It makes life a lot easier.
I see. So this way, it does not affect the P&L.
No.
The expenses, they go out as expenses, and you can still qualify for the grant. Okay, the grant is just the grant is separate as other income, so it's not taxed.
No.
Does not go also in the P&L.
No. I don't not want to say this. It hurts to say it. The grant is income, and therefore it attracts income tax, which means that the government is being so generous, giving you $10,000 as a first-time exporter, and then they're going to go and claim 25% of that back as part of their tax.
Okay, I see. Okay,
so
it comes out this way, not from the P&L, but you still pay tax on it as an income.
It just comes in as other income. It just comes, however you describe it, but it comes in. So it doesn't have a cost of goods, but yes, it just comes in as other income in your business. Yeah.
Very clear. Thank you.
So first thing to do is to check your eligibility. Is my turnover over 20 million? We'll go through with you all those eligibility tests. Am I marketing to a country that I'm allowed to market to, etc. Ensure you have a MyGovID login. Okay. So then we've done that. Vebiz will actually use the EMDG portal, the Austrade portal, and we will lodge your application for you. But what has to be lodged is an application document, and we will send all to everyone here as soon as I've got, and I think I've got Yasser as well. I've already planned to send him something anyway. But we will send you out some work papers that help us gather all this information that you're going to need. So you need an application which has got all your data about, where the company is, who the contact is, what your phone number is, all that sort of stuff. Then there's a plan to market. We will help you with your plan to market. It does not need to be an extensive business plan. It's a one-pager saying, I'm going to go and do trade shows in the UK, and I'm going to put a representative on in Colombia, and I'm going to use Facebook in the US. You're just telling them what your plan, your marketing strategy is for your product. You need to supply your P&L and your balance sheet. If you have just started the company this year and you don't have a 21-22 P&L and balance sheet, again, we will find the ways around that you need to be able to get around that. But otherwise, we just go back to the 21-22 P&L and balance sheet. And if we want to get out of tier 1, then we'll need an export invoice. Now, we may need a trust deed if it's a trust that is making the application. We may need, if you're making goods that are made outside Australia, as we described, they're designed here but made outside Australia, we need to do a submission. We can work with you and do the submission for you to prove that you're value adding to Australia. And then the same thing, we'll do a services submission if you've got services that are being offered outside Australia. They're the only documents, both compulsory and optional. The only other thing I'd say is that if they don't quite understand your business, they may come back and say, oh, can you prove to us this? Can you show us that? And so you may need to go into some more documents, but effectively this is what is sent in. It's attached as a download to the portal, and that's what the Austrade assessor will work from, are those documents there. So the important timeline here is that we have an application period for next financial year's expenditure, okay, for what you think you'll spend or what you might spend next year, which will open on the 15th of March and it will close at 4 p.m. on the 14th of April. So there's a month to get this in. If we miss that date, then it doesn't matter how much you spend next year and how much exporting and how many sales you make, you won't be able to claim the export grant. The applications are received and assessed by Austrade, and they will send the grant agreement back to you with the agreed dollar amount, whether it be that 10 or 15 or 25 or some other number that they assign to each of those tiers. They should do that before the end of June. They understand what they're actually asking a bit better, and they should have it out fairly quick. So you will then sign that grant agreement, and this is where you're having a MyGov ID comes in. I won't go into it now, but that's why you need a MyGov ID. You'll sign the grant agreement, and that locks the government in to agreeing to you, and you're locking yourself in to agreeing that you're going to try and sell things in a way somewhat like what you put in your plan to market. So you need to look at the eligibility. You're Australian. It's for any form of business structure. Nearly any form of business structure can go into it. You'll then need to conduct your marketing activities according to your plan or agreement. So if you decide that your plan of marketing was you're going to do trade shows in the UK, but for whatever reason you get this opportunity and you say, oh, no, we're going to go and do it in Alaska, then that's not a problem. But if it's a market move from away from what you had said you might do, then we just go back to Austrade and we say, look, we're not marketing in the UK anymore. We're now going to market in Alaska. And we just put that in as a variation on the agreement. Okay. But again, you stay in contact with Vebiz so that if these things change, we're able to advise and then go to Austrade and discuss with them to make sure that it gets through and it just doesn't suddenly turn up on their desk and they throw it out when you least want it. After July, after the 30th of June, another document will be available on the portal, and that'll be called the milestone report. And that basically says, we spent this amount, our number of hits on the website increased by 10%. We went to 4 trade shows, and they were in, they were in Ankara, they were in Abu Dhabi, they were wherever they were. They'll assess that and say, yep, that looks fine, or they might want more information. They'll send you the funds, by which stage, because this is a 1-year grant, it has been a longer grant, because it's a 1-year grant, at this time next year, they haven't worked out what they're going to do yet, because they're stopping this particular program on June 30 of 2024, but they have said that they'll have another program that actually will work as it was intended. This one is not working as it was intended. Will actually work, and there will be an application period probably at this same time next year with a whole lot of different rules and a whole lot of different eligibility from what we have today. So we'll probably be sitting here in 12 months' time doing this again for a grant that'll have the same name, but I won't be able to use these slides anymore because it'll probably be completely different. And so, yeah, so get the funds and then prepare for next year's application is the timeline that you're going to be going to. So that's just a summary of what we've done. I won't hang around on that one. What Vebiz does is we'll help you work out where you should go and how we can use whatever tier you can. We'll help you with, if you want to develop export plans, your plan to market specifically for this grant, help you create with the grant applications, the documents you need, the transaction records that you'll need, help you with the audit process and any follow-up that's necessary with Austrade. For instance, This year, we've had half a dozen people that have had trouble getting onto my Gov ID. They've needed extensions. They've done this. We will handle all of that as much as we can with Austrade, so that basically, so I've got this problem, Stuart, go and sort it out. That's our job. And then when we've sorted out and found out exactly what Austrade need, then we can ask you specifically for what they need, and hopefully solve whatever the issue is much more easily. Next steps, I'd say, is contact us with any questions. Let's start the application process planning with us. After this, anyone that wants it, McDad can send us their email, and I will send you out the work papers that will help you start to put together the application. It's probably a point to say our services, the cost of our services we charge 10% of whatever you're getting back from the government, and that's when you get it back. So there's no upfront cost and there's no minimum fee. It's just 10% at the time that you receive the funds from the government.
So just to clarify that the companies will pay the 10% after they receive the grant from the government, the actual money.
Yes, after they receive the funding from the government, yeah. And it's based on what you receive, not what. So if you don't spend, if you've got 25,000, but for whatever reason you spend far less and you get less back, then it's just 10% of what you receive. Okay. A quick throw in there, we do other government grants. Mick mentioned the research and development grants. There are lots of business grants. We also do, we also work on not-for-profit grants and grants that cross over both federal and different states. So we will let you know, and probably let Mick know, if we think there are grants that you should know about. And as soon as we get your email, you become part of the newsletter that has grants and that sort of information in it. But by all means, if you hear of something, because in your particular industry or your particular area of interest, you're going to hear about things far more likely than we are. Your industry newsletter will come out and say, whatever industry it is, the IT industry, government's released these grants. If you hear of it, come to us, let us know, let us look up the guidelines and do the hard work on the guidelines and say, yep, this is what we need to do. You're eligible and you meet the objectives. Let's go ahead and let's try and do an application. So contact either of us, and that's us there. So any questions, by all means, on our website, if you're not sure and you still want to contact us, our website has a link that you can book a time, puts it in our diary. So you pick the time, if it's free on our calendar, you'll get that spot. So happy for any questions, and any I can't answer, I'm sure Robert would be able to help me out. Yasser? Yes, it's still there. He's logged on. He may not be there.
No, I'm still here too.
Good. No, I was just wondering if Yasser was there.
Yasser, brother Yasser, can you help? Can you hear us?
He might be listening. Not to worry. One of the things I wanted to ask, well, some companies will develop a special company or structure to market overseas. Others will just use their single one company that they use for everything and market overseas. That was something to follow up on companies that are, and some companies will have a separate company for going to different parts of the world. They will set up a Muziad US, a Muziad UK, Muziad Egypt, or wherever it might be. Others will just have one company and that will do all the work. So with that, feel free. You might want to stop the recording there. Do you want to stop the recording?